Toby, thank you very much for coming on L&D Disrupt.
Really great to be here. Thanks for the invite, Gary. Greatly appreciated.
Yeah, well, we're going to have a really interesting discussion today because we're talking about the current state of the talent landscape based on data from not one, but two reports that you sent me recently. One is about your talent trends report, but the one we'll probably lean on most heavily is one you recently published with Workmonitor on the voice of talent in 2024. So I'll put links to download both in the show notes, but before we get really into it, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what those reports are as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Gary. And I'm really excited to be here and be able to share some of the data, some of the findings from the views of employees, but also from the views of employers about what's coming in 2024 and beyond. So firstly, I'm Toby Crane. So I'm Solutions Director at Randstad Risesmart. And Randstad Risesmart are part of the Randstad Enterprise Group, who very much support organisations with their talent strategies, their people strategies. So that's from talent advisory, talent acquisition, talent development, so people within an organisation, what opportunities can they look at, what internal mobility opportunities, what career development can they look at, and then transitions as well, so people moving away from an organisation. So that's where Risesmart are positioned within the Randstad Enterprise Group. And just really pleased to be here to talk about the reports. So you mentioned a couple. We've got the Workmonitor report, which I think we're going to focus on most. And this is for the views of around 27,000 odd employees around the world on what they're looking for to get a really rewarding and engaging workplace, rewarding and engaging career, and just allow them to be their best selves, to be engaged, to be brand ambassadors, and to really look to stay at an organisation. And then we're also going to touch on our Global Talent Trends report, which is the views of C-suite and HR leaders on what they see coming over the next kind of 12 to 18 months within that talent marketplace. So lots of great data to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And a really robust sample. I don't think I often see such huge numbers of respondents in reports is front and center in there. And most of the time, I think it gets buried in the T's and C's right at the bottom that we spoke to this kind of small sample, but that's a really, yeah, exactly like the Head and Shoulders commercial. The first one that really stood out to me was this idea of maybe the conversation is moving a little bit away from pay and linear progression to skills and work-life balance. So I've got a few numbers that really stuck out to me here. 60% say their personal lives are more important than their work life, and 57% consider it more important than higher pay when considering new roles. At the same time, 51% say they're happy to stay in a role, even if there's no room for quote unquote progression, but 72% want to improve their skills through training and development opportunities. So why do you think people are so adamant that skills are important to them? And do you think it's feeding into this change in perception of what progression is?
Yeah, sure. And I think absolutely there is a changing view on progression at the moment. And I think that changing view has actually been here for quite a long time now. It's no longer that linear route of just looking upwards within an organisation, but people are looking at other areas within an organisation, outside an organisation they can get involved in. So this could be completely different to their day-to-day. It could be project work, for example. And by having different skill sets, by learning different skill sets, but also understanding your transferable skills, it very much unlocks doors to these different areas and projects. I think as well, Gary, people are very aware of needing themselves, their profile to remain future ready, future proof is another way of putting it. There's a lot more visibility now. So if you take AI, for example, and everything that people are going to see in the news, they know that they need to upskill to allow for their career to be safe and productive for the next few years. For example, with tech advancing, you very much need people who are able to interpret the data that comes off the back of that. I saw an interesting stat between 2012 and 2021, demand for data analysis skills grew by 15 times. So there's an example there of there being a real opportunity to work in partnership with tech, a real opportunity for people to learn new skills. And so by doing that, their career becomes more more future ready. And then businesses themselves can't sleep, on this. If they're not supporting people to learn these new skills, then they're going to have a bit of a problem. I think sales is another area as well. If to give a practical example, you will have all the different versions of sales skills today. A few years ago it was that sort of consultative sales model. Now it's very much the challenger sales model. Partnerships are based on those relationship holders bringing commercial insight to the organization. So and buyers are expecting a little bit more from salespeople. So that's an example of someone's career progressing through their skills because they're becoming more successful as salespeople. Ultimately, Gary.
Yeah, I think it's that idea that your title isn't the thing that future-proofs you. Like if you can't demonstrate impact or a skill that's relevant to, for example, the market that you're operating in, then any sort of conversation about progression or some new role that you're going to enter will fall apart pretty quickly, because there will be probing questions, and the probing questions will take you to, have you done X, Y, and Z? Do you have this kind of skill? So I agree, it's a shift that's been happening for a while. We just now have this solid data behind it to say, look, one, work-life balance is really important to people, so is purpose. And two, in this time where we need to build skills more than ever, people really are viewing that as their way of progression, as opposed to simply, I need X title and X salary.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think sometimes people see these, both employers and employees can feel daunted by this need to upskill, but often it's not a huge transformation to be able to shift from one area to another. So we work with a big manufacturing organization. There's a big tech department within that, and they found by some simple upskilling maneuvers, they could very quickly move people from one division to another to a slightly higher priority area. But it wasn't a big shift in upskilling because they already had those innate core skills within the work they're already doing. So it's about looking at how best you can adapt to this within your organization.
Yeah. Two of the things you said, they reminded me of good examples that I saw. One was Amazon. It was the data analysis point you mentioned, actually. They looked over a 5-year period, which skills were they most commonly hiring to fill? And one of them was data analysis. And therefore, how do we upskill people in that instead of necessarily always hiring? And another one was Booking.com. They couldn't find coders who could use a particular coding language, but there was a huge number of people with this fairly similar coding language. So what they did was hired the people with the similar skill set on the premise that once they join the company, they'd be upskilled quickly in this other language for coding to fill the gap instead. So yeah, I really like this kind of mindset of shifting the way companies look at it as well.
Yeah, and if a company's doing that, Gary, obviously they're saving money, frankly, because they're not looking to bring people in, they're not needing to onboard people, or if the other side of things, they're letting people go because they don't think they have those right skills during a very fast-moving economic environment. They might be looking to rehire those people at a future date, which is obviously not efficient, cost-effective. So by looking internally, where have we got those core skills at the moment? What development can we do? It's a win-win, isn't it, for both the organisation and their employees?
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned the financial part of it there as well, because this led me nicely on to the other data point that really stood out to me. And it was the economic situation seems like it's having less of an impact on people's concerns around career progression. So in 2023, 50% were concerned about economic uncertainty and how it would influence their career. But that number has fallen to just 23% in 2024, which is quite a big swing in a short space of time. So what impact do you think this is going to have on the talent and hiring landscape?
Yeah, and I think it's unfortunate to say it, and I wish I wasn't saying it, but I think there's a little bit of an environment now where people are just getting a bit used to that economic uncertainty. We've seen it for so long. You read about in the news every day, so people are kind of understanding that they need to take ownership around what they're doing and taking a little bit less of a look at that external factors. So it's about people really kind of becoming career activists themselves, taking ownership of their careers. How can I develop? What skills do I need to learn? What can I read? What direction is the market's going in? But they also need an employer who's bought, who's bought into this. So, but you could have an employee understanding their key strengths, development areas, what engages them. But if their employer doesn't provide them with any L&D training resources, any opportunities to really explore these areas, and those people are going to come disengaged, they're going to leave the organization, and you're going to lose good people who are potentially brand ambassadors for you. So I think very much in terms of the hiring landscape, there's a lot more focus on those people taking ownership of their own career. And I think on behalf of the employer, there's a lot more focus around redeployment and internal mobility. So as we were saying on the previous question, organisations are reducing that need for redundancy. They're very much saving on hiring and rehiring costs, and they're boosting that engagement and retention because they're meeting what people need. And when we look at the data within our research, within that talent trends, it's well over 50% of talent leaders are looking forward to an increase in internal mobility as they look forward to 2024 and beyond.
Interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that actually. In my mind, maybe I'm just such a positive person, my mind instantly went to things have got better. That's why less people are concerned. But you're right, people might be just saying, these are the parameters of what I've got to work in now. I'm more aligned or acceptant of the fact that this is happening. So now I need to view my development through the lens of the current financial situation and just approach it the best I can. And the same with companies, like maybe that's part of the equation as well. Things necessarily haven't got better for us. So maybe we do need to just think the best thing we can do in this situation is prioritize internal mobility, because we know one of the highest cost things is to lose good people and also the time it takes to find, hire and ramp up good people as well. So yeah, I hadn't thought of it from that angle. It's interesting.
Yeah, and the half-life of skills it's so short now, or how it has been historically in the past. There's a real onus on it, on again the employee and the employer, both of them themselves, to help that development process to allow people to have those rewarding and engaging careers. So it's very much that partnership approach.
Yeah. It reminds me as well of some data I read at the end of last year. It was about a disconnect between employers and employees around development. And there was a non-insignificant percentage of employees who had paid for development out of their own pocket because they weren't getting it internally, to your earlier point. So even if the economic situation doesn't seem necessarily that secure, people are still saying development is that important to me that I will spend from my own pocket to get the resources, the knowledge, the skills I need to progress. So it really, I guess all of these things just hammer home one of those first points. People really, really do want to build skills, and they want to be in the company that's the right environment to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting you mentioned people paying out of their own pocket. Where you can, for employers, if you can understand what skills your people are looking for and what skills are going to help them and help the business, then, make them available and make them available in the flow of work, and make it a really easy, straightforward process for people to start to upskill in those areas. Because if you start to get people kind of completely focusing externally outside of an organization on development, it's quite a simple shift for them to do that and then slip onto other companies' career pages and start to look at other opportunities. So understand your people, understand what's engaging them and what do you need to be successful in the future.
Yeah. No, that's a good point, because I don't want to use the word control in the sense of companies want to control what people are learning. But if you are the owner of the content they're consuming, then it's done in the context of your company and where you work, and directly aligned, if you're sensible about it, to your goals, your mission, your values. If people do have to go into externally to find content, it's not directly applicable because it's not created in a context. And like you say, it might lead them to find other companies. It might mean that they just learn stuff that takes longer to go and apply. So I think there's a lot of spillover benefits of thinking in this way.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's another nice one. I want to talk about sort of the wider company picture before we get into development more specifically. But there was a really interesting one around working from home being a non-negotiable for 2 to 5 employees. And what was really, really exciting to me was the split between some of these numbers. So 37% said they would consider quitting if they had to spend more time in the office. But 41% say their employer had become stricter about attendance in the past few months. And then another really interesting split, there were roughly as many people who stated their employer wanted them in the office more than 6 months ago at 35%, as those who didn't feel the same pressure, 34%. So it's very interesting that there's companies that seem to be really leaning into come back to the office and companies that are still really driving the flexibility. And from what people I've spoken to, this is really influencing the type of roles they apply for, the sort of companies they would want to go and work at. So from the perspective of the employer brand and the company's ability to hire the best people, what do you think all of this means?
Yeah, I think firstly that, trust your people. I think if you are calling people back into the office because you don't trust them, then there's a real disconnect between you and your management style, your leadership style, and the people you're supporting. So for me, whatever approach an organization comes up with, it really needs to be as inclusive as possible for the unique needs of the people who work for that organization. Really give those people a sense of belonging. You've listened to them, understand where they are able to do their best work. I mean, if I take me, for example, I have 2 young children, 5 and 7, and that comes with a lot of pickups, parents' evenings, whatever it is. It's something different every day. And we very much have a work from home culture, and that flexibility completely suits my way of working, and it really allows me to feel authentic, trusted, and engaged at work. So I think you need to create an environment where you're understanding your employee base and what allows them to do their best work. Obviously, where possible, because you're going to have manufacturing floors, for example, in businesses. So in those circumstances, people are going to have to be there. But when there's a situation where someone can work from home, I just think you should consider that for their engagement. Don't make it hold back any career opportunities they have, and then that person will have a better intention to stay. At the same time, you'll have people who like that office collaborative environment, and if you can create that, then fantastic, because you're meeting the needs of people through that balance. And the reason this is important as well is employees are huge ambassadors and drivers of a company brand. So if you think about someone looking at your organization and why they should work for you, they're going to go on LinkedIn, they're going to go on Glassdoor, they're going to go on career stories on company pages. Job seekers are very savvy these days in terms of their research they are doing on potential employers. So it's how you treat your current employees is what's going to create brand ambassadors for you. So as much as you can, I think it's important that organizations think about what suits the needs of the individual as someone unique.
Yeah, I like the idea of internal and external factors. And I think Glassdoor is a good example to that, because people who work there right now might leave reviews around how flexible or inflexible the culture is. People who've applied for a job but didn't progress because you weren't being inflexible around your policies of working, they'll also leave reviews about the interview process. So I do think it's just about being intentional, like you said. To your point, if your company has a lot of people who have kids, or say our company has a lot of people that are from maybe like different countries or different parts of the country, having them mandated to be in the office 2 or 3 days a week means they can spend less time with their families. They can travel less frequently to see their relatives or whatever it is. So unless you're looking at the data of who makes up your company and what matters to them, you won't do anything that aligns to your culture. And also you might miss out on some of the best talent in a really competitive space because you're not being flexible at all. So it's interesting that people are saying that it's a non-negotiable, but companies aren't necessarily being flexible on this really important thing to potential talent. So it'll be interesting to see.
There's that part, isn't there, around lip service and what people are saying, and then what's actually happening on the ground. So you've really got to practice what you preach, because your employees are going to know about it, and they're going to put that out there.
Yeah, it's a little bit of podcast inception, because I interviewed two people from Lace Partners, who are a HR transformation consultancy, and I mentioned your data to them. But one interesting thing they mentioned to me is that people often get their employer brand and their employee value proposition mixed up. So they'll kind of decide what the brand is before they have any real substance to it below the surface. For example, with our job description, say £500 learning development budget, and when I ask a follow-up question about how that's spent or what the structure is for spending that, there's nothing there, then that isn't a good experience for me as a potential candidate, is it? Because I'll just be like, well, you have the budget, but I don't have the confidence now that it's actually going to drive my development. It kind of seems like, to your point, there's lip service. So I do agree with this point of there has to be substance to anything you do before you start trying to use it as a part of your talent proposition, or else you are just going to get asked one or two follow-up questions and the whole house of cards is going to cave in.
Yeah, and if there's not any substance and you're not supporting people through your own pathways, easily accessible resources, as we were saying before, what's somebody going to do? They're going to go, you go to someone, right, we give everyone an hour each week to develop their career. People are just going to go on external company pages and go, right, what do I need for this external job? Because they don't know what's available internally, because they haven't been provided any content, any key development resources, or any understanding how it can support them. So yeah, as you say, you need to have some sort of weight behind what you're talking about.
Yeah, definitely. To your point there, you have to be able to communicate the value of something to someone. If there's no substance there, you really struggle. And to the previous point as well, if you don't understand your people, then you have no idea what motivates them, and you'll never be able to communicate effectively to them. So can't highlight how important it is not to gloss over that step of understanding who your people are, what matters to them, and feeding that into a real substantial talent offering, I guess. We spoke a little bit about non-negotiables and learning there, which leads us nicely to, maybe from a biased viewpoint of being here at HowNow, what L&D means to people, because around a third would go as far as quitting a job that didn't offer adequate learning and development opportunities, which really chimes with what I've seen. But any thoughts on, sort of beyond what we've already spoke about, on why this is happening? And is it maybe that employees are really just viewing L&D as that vehicle to build the skills they need now to make sure they are future-proofed for what comes next?
I think, L&D, as we move into this changing environment, just has such a key part to play within all organisations around that employee value proposition and how they're supporting people to develop and skill to support their career. So we've touched on a few data points, but I saw one recently from Deloitte that said the number one reason for people quitting under 25 is professional development. It's number two for people over 25. So if you don't invest in it and you don't have L&D as a fully functioning vehicle, then you are in a real risky situation of people leaving an organization. Employees see this fast changing work environment. The half-life of skills at the moment is around 2 years and decreasing. So if people don't feel that they are developing in the role, they're going to get nervous, they're going to get a bit shifty, and they're going to be going, why isn't L&D supporting me doing this? So there's a real onus, I think, on those L&D departments to understand the skills that are coming, what are needed in the future, what is most in demand and what allows people to be most agile in their careers, because what this sort of continual development does, and I think I've mentioned it a few times within this session, is it brings the two parties together. Really, if you have employees owning their own career, being career activists and wanting to develop, and then understanding where they can get all those resources, having a real partnership with their internal L&D teams and having access to all the resources they need to be successful within the organization, then you're going to have a hugely engaged workforce actively looking for other opportunities within an organization, and looking to stay as well, which is that kind of perfect melting pot. I think also on this point, it's worth mentioning around L&D teams looking at how they can create that inclusive environment for people and be a real vehicle for learning, but being a real vehicle for someone's career and their intention to stay, is being able to understand everybody in the organization, essentially. So not just, which is a very sort of old-fashioned historical view of leaning in towards senior executives or leaning into identified hypos within an organization or people who shout the loudest. You need some L&D vehicle which allows for everybody to participate, to understand the value that's being put into them, and the resources being put into place that can meet those key needs. Otherwise, you've got a real risk of losing, and we call it unhidden talent within an organization, which you see a lot. You have a lot of people leaving an organization because they feel they're not listened to, they feel they're not developed. And that's because they haven't been identified. And that might be because leaders are just looking for mirror images of themselves, where actually different skills, different viewpoints are hugely important. So L&D, and to be that sort of successful vehicle, need a really inclusive, visible approach to supporting people within their organization. And very much how we do it. We are all about at Randstad, Risesmart, Randstad Enterprise. We very much partner with organizations to create an inclusive coaching culture. So we very much believe in democratizing coaching for everybody within an organization. And this allows for people to feel their own unique career paths are being heard, their own personal needs, their engagement needs are being met. And these career coaches as well can direct them to L&D resources that are available that are a great fit for them. And it just helps to create that kind of integrated, inclusive culture, partnering people to that L&D team via democratized coaching.
Toby, there was so much I agree with what you said in there. And one of the ones that spoke to me massively was this idea around friction, because a lot of people can't learn when things aren't centralized. They can't find them. A lot of people don't know who to ask, or they don't feel comfortable asking. If we don't capture knowledge from our subject matter experts, then how are people meant to find it unless they're in direct contact with those people? So that's one of the first things we solve for companies, is to just bring everything to the end of one search so everyone can find it, empower internal experts to create content so that it doesn't get lost. And that just kind of levels the playing field in terms of people being able to access what they need to grow. And that does make it a more equal playing field when it comes to L&D.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important to make it available to everyone. You know, if you're somebody within an organization, you know, maybe you're a bit quieter and you see someone near you who's a lot louder and they've got access to all of this, you know, great learning material, and you don't have it, just because it's not an easily accessible place, then that's just going to completely disengage you. And as you know, as we were talking about that risk of hidden talent leaving an organization, you've got to have it. You've got to have it readily available to people, visible, easy to find, and the right fit and content.
100%. If people aren't engaged as well, they don't really see the point in flagging something to you. Like, for example, I couldn't find this thing I needed. If they're a bit disengaged already, it kind of might send them down the path of checking out mentally a bit more than it will engaging them to come and find the resources they need. And it speaks to your point about L&D being a facilitator. You know, if I know in the business which goals we're trying to reach or problems we're trying to solve, I know the people who are motivated to learn and what they're motivated by, then I can kind of bring all these things together to solve a problem by helping a person build a skill. And if you see that shift as your role is now to facilitate, then I think that's usually pretty helpful.
Yeah, Absolutely. It's bringing those worlds together, the employer, the employee, and what's the most streamlined way you can do that. And couldn't agree more.
And another point, the research I mentioned to you earlier around employees being willing to pay out of their own pocket came from the same study that showed that there was a disconnect between who was responsible. Some C-suite people agreed that employees needed to build these skills, but they viewed the employee as responsible. Some employees also viewed that they needed to build the skills, but they thought the organization was responsible. And there's this disconnect between who actually owns this. And obviously we know from our conversation so far, the ideal world is that everyone owns it together. But how do you see this? And did the research recently reveal anything around the ownership of development?
Yeah, and it was refreshing to see and good to see as businesses are looking forward to this year and beyond. So from our research, 76% of leaders was saying they were putting more of an emphasis on skilling and career engagement, career development for 2024. So, people teams, leadership teams, CEOs are certainly learning about the value of engaging and developing their workforce so they can move people around to those high priority areas to meet fast changing needs. But they've also got those really engaged people doing their best piece of work. So very much, I think, moving forward, and probably what we've been seeing happening as well in the last year is businesses taking a bit more of that ownership around the development of individuals. And also, I think when development can potentially become more complex, perhaps there are a few more kind of data points people need to tap into, the fast advancements of AI, for example. It's easier for businesses to get hold of all of that information than it is for individuals. So I think for individuals, it could be easy to get lost in a bit of a minefield of data and resources and research. So you absolutely need a really functioning L&D team to be able to communicate and articulate where people can be looking for their own development.
Yeah, I really like that actually, because we know people like freedom, they like flexibility, they like autonomy, and they like opportunity. But what they don't want is just free reign on that. I really like that point you make around the organization having access to things that employees will miss. So if the industry is moving in a particular way, the company is probably more likely to spot that collectively than an individual is. And if that influences the skills I need to build, then of course I need structure from the organization above me. I don't just necessarily need free reign to go and find the thing. I need the structure from someone else to say, look, this is going to be the best way for you to go and build this skill, because this is the way you want to go in your career, and this is what the company's trying to do at the moment. So it's really, like you say, refreshing to hear that companies are prioritizing development and making sure it's done in the right way as well.
Yeah, and I think in terms of if an organization makes it easy for people, so as you were saying, Gary, so organizations making something readily available and inclusive for all within an organization, then it might be a case that an employee who wants to develop their skills, to develop their career, can very simply go on to some resources and find a simple skills assessment so they can begin to understand their key development areas. They can understand what courses are then available to develop in those key skills, to find opportunities within other parts of an organization. Ideal world as well, you've got L&D linking in with those internal TA, talent acquisition functions. So those individuals are starting to understand, what engages them in their career, what engages them personally, what development areas do they need to work on, and then having visibility to those opportunities within an organization. You're creating some really nice pathways for someone to stay within your organization, because they're understanding all the different avenues and angles that they can go in, and they're really understanding how they can go there. And again, how we support this is where we use external coaches, because what that does, it really gives them a safe space for employees across an organization. We do recommend democratizing it to be able to focus on their own personal individual career goals. They can create career plans. Their coach can direct them to those internal learning resources that are available for them. Not all resources, but the right ones to them. And then if they find opportunities, their coach can support them to build a CV, can support them developing interview skills, and link them into those external talent acquisition teams so that they can then go and secure the deal to find their next opportunity within an organisation. So it's employers putting all the resources in place, employees taking ownership, having easy access to those resources, perhaps in partnership with a coach, and having great visibility around what internal opportunities are there for them. So it all comes together, but I think it's great to see that employers are really investing in it as we move forward.
Yeah. I really like the way you explain those three parts of it, because it is just about executing those simple things well. It might sound really simple to people, like these are the three things you need to do, but if it was that simple, everyone would be doing it. So take those things, go and execute them to a higher standard, and you are creating the right environment for people. You mentioned it being personal as well, and that leads me nicely to another data point that I wanted to ask you about.
It is about simplicity.
Oh, we're having more technical difficulties. I can't believe it.
I think that's me this time. No, I think it's me this time. It's unstable. Shouldn't be. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're all good now. That's fine. Yeah, that's all good. We'll kind of pick up again, and yeah, we're resilient. We're building our skill for resilience and disruption.
Absolutely.
Cool. Yeah, that's it was basically, I wanted to pick up at that fifth question that I wanted to ask you around understanding the context of someone's development. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I love the fact you mentioned personal there, because development does need to be personal and contextual for every person in your business. And there's a really nice stat. I'll actually just read a small section of the report to you, but more than half say they would stay in a role that they like, even if it offers no chance for progression. For others, they are not seeking career advancement because of circumstances in their lives outside of work. More than 4 in 10 say their level of ambition changes depending on factors outside of their job. And this really resonated with me, because I think companies often fall into the misconception that everyone is super motivated to develop and learn right now, whereas our lives are more complex than that. And we just might not have the capacity or the motivation for these big conversations around change. Or we might have actually just spent the last year in a really intense period of building skills, and we're just a bit burnt out and we don't really have the energy to do it right now. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how companies can build that context more into their development plans, and kind of just accept that not everyone wants to develop all the time.
Yeah, and we hear it a lot. Look, we're in such a volatile environment at the moment due to all sorts of different external forces. And I think when people hear career development, a lot of the time people become just completely overwhelmed, and they're thinking, that's just an extra thing I've got to focus on. And to be honest with you, right now, I just want to do my day-to-day job, be successful in that. I haven't got the kind of the brain power to focus on something additional, which is pushing my own career. But I think at the same time, and this is where simplicity comes into it, and how can you make it easy, accessible, and simple for people to work on their career, to not feel overwhelming, because ultimately career and not necessarily progression, but development. So understanding more your own personal career needs, what engages you, where are you best suited, is a good thing. Because if you understand what engages you, if you understand where you're playing to your strengths, then you're going to enjoy your career more, and to be honest, you're likely to feel less overwhelmed. So for me, that is still career development. So I think it's still really important that people have the simple way of continuing to do that without it feeling overwhelming. So, as we've mentioned loads of time, companies need to make this easily accessible for people. So that could be really readily available L&D resources, which are very easy to find, but targeted resources that are easy to find, dependent on what someone is getting to understand from their own career needs. So in the context of their own individual needs. Or it might be that if someone has simple access to a career coach in the flow of work as they're coming up a particular challenge, for example, they've got a career conversation, they've got a conversation with someone within their team, they can simply have a coaching conversation with someone within that flow of work, and it's going to support them in their career development, probably progression as well, but not necessarily. But I think it's about what can you have available very easily, where can you have champions pointing people in the right direction for things, just making it part of business as usual and not something where somebody's thinking of this extra kind of sixth string on their 5-string instrument that they need to consider.
Yeah. To your point as well, define what development means internally, like development, like you say, it can feel overwhelming, but only because often people hear development and suddenly their mind's gone to, well, I've got to build this 40-hour course or an accreditation or this big project. But you could just make sure there's clarity internally around what development means. And sometimes it might mean you spent an hour listening to a podcast. Other weeks it might mean that you've nailed the skills framework that you need to do internally. It's not like 100 miles an hour every single day, is it? So I suppose it's about just clarity as well internally.
Yeah, and I love that. Just mentioning your podcast, I often have a podcast in the background as I work, and I'm kind of not necessarily fully focused on it, but you always have a couple of key takeaways from them. And as you say, just understanding what development means and making sure it fits, and just making people not nervous about it.
If you're like me, you've got the tier of podcasts as well. You've got like ones that I have on during the day at work, ones that I actually pay full attention to when I go for a walk, ones for the commute. Like your brain capacity is different, tailored to the type of podcast I find.
Yeah, absolutely. It absolutely depends what you're doing. I've trained podcasts. Yeah.
There's definitely like 30 minutes. The short ones are the train ones for me. Lastly, Toby, was there anything in either of the reports or key data points that you wanted to discuss that we hadn't tackled so far, or anything useful people need to know that we didn't really dive into?
I think for me, and this one comes from our talent trends report. So this is the view of C-suite and C-level talent leaders within organizations, is that 76% of people surveyed believe the talent experience has become more important to their organization over the last 12 months. So it's all around that. It's not about let's bring the best talent in and let them get on with their own devices, and because it's talent, they'll do well, they'll find their own opportunities, and they'll be really productive for the organization. It's very much creating that full employee value proposition for people when they come into an organization. So it's that talent acquisition experience. It's how unique is their experience when they get brought into an organization? How well fitted is their onboarding experience, whether that's 6, that's 12 months. Are you allowing someone to be their authentic self? Are you allowing someone to understand where they can network in within the organization? Are you allowing someone to understand those key learning and development resources right from the off? So as soon as someone's in an organization, they go, wow, this organization really values my development, whoever I am, whatever my needs, so I know exactly where to go, and I just feel the value that this business is putting into me from the off. And then it continues throughout the organization in regards to that training development opportunities. It's always, as we've talked about, giving people access to those resources, is giving people access to where opportunities are within other parts of the business. So after 18, 24 months, people are still being supported, their experience is still being considered, and that's about the time when people look to move within an organization or could potentially become a risk of leaving an organization because they're not seeing those opportunities. So that investment is very much in the minds and in the hearts of businesses at the moment, because they understand how important it is to retain their best people, and they're only going to do that if they develop them, they engage them, and they allow them to move within an organization. So I think that stat around 76% of people believing that talent experience has become so important to their organization is just a really important one.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice note to end on, actually, because when you were saying that stuff there, reminded me of loads of the stuff we talked about today is about being intentional about what you do and when, like making sure that the right touch point happens for onboarding, that the people have got that understanding of learning and development and where the resources are at the right time, that the skill conversation happens at the right time, that the actions happen at the right time. So I really like that, because it is kind of the theme of this conversation. Just make sure you're doing the right thing at the right moment and ensuring that the right people are involved to really build an effective talent offering that is considerate of the context of your organization. So I really think that's a powerful note to end on.
Yeah, and great. Thanks, Gary. And I think for organizations as well, having ownership, talk about data.
Yeah.
So for organizations, take a look at your data, look at your engagement data, look at pulse survey data, look at exit data. When are people leaving your organization? Exit surveys. Just get under the skin of what is happening with your employees and what are they looking for from their careers to be engaged and rewarded, so they're going to do their best work for you.
Yeah, 100%. Before you do that, though, make sure you check out the 2 big pieces of data that are going to be linked in the show description. There, I was almost flawless with my segue, but the Talent Trends Report and the Workmonitor Voice of the Talent Survey will both be linked in the show notes below, so you can go get all of the data. There's loads more interesting data points and insights throughout the 2 reports. It's just that these were the 5 that kind of really stuck out to me. So yep, they'll all be linked. And Toby, massive thank you again for coming on the show and sticking through us with the technical difficulties that we faced as well.
My pleasure, Gary, and thanks for having me on. It's been great fun.